I want you to learn about the United States and the Great War. Washington warned us there'd be days like this. So the Great War, World War I, starts without the U.S. We're not involved at the beginning, but we do need to talk about how we got there, right? How Europe got there. And there's a nice little acronym, the four main reasons for World War I starting. Now, Archduke Franz Ferdinand gets assassinated in Serbia. Serbia and the Austro-Hungarian Empire start, mouthing off to each other. Germany and Russia get involved, and here we go, right? But even if that hadn't happened, it's entirely possible something else would have set off this powder keg that's been building in Europe. And the main is what sets up the powder keg, right? Is what sets up the situation that makes it possible for one assassination to set off World War I. So the M stands for militarism. All these countries, Germany, France, England, Russia, they have these modern militaries, and they really want to try them out, right? Like they really want to use them. It's like when you get a toy, you get a new toy or a new thing, you really want to use it, right? So all these armies, all these militaries are building up in Europe. Something's going to give. The A in Maine stands for alliances, just this web of secret alliances. We're going to look at a chart. The good news is you don't have to memorize the chart, but it'll show you just how complicated this got. And the problem with that is that if one country goes to war with one other country, that whole web of alliances is going to bring all of Europe into it, and it does. Imperialism. We've been talking about imperialism. Remember, the U.S. just became an imperial power. Well, these smaller countries are kind of jealous that France has an empire, England has an empire, Japan's getting an empire, America's getting an empire. Other countries want in on this action. It's the way to get rich during this time period. And then the N in nationalism finally stands for nationalism, this national pride. Now, there's a difference between nationalism and patriotism. Patriotism, you're proud of your country. No problem. Totally fine. Nationalism is when your country is above all others in every way possible. And what happens to other countries doesn't matter. And something, as we go into this, we're going to talk about nationalism. And when we talk about nationalism at the start of World War I, we're talking about this just incredible surge of national pride where, and we'll talk about it. These days in 2020, nationalism is kind of tied into Nazism. World War I's before the Nazis. So it's not quite the same thing. It's the same word, but it has a very different meaning before World War II and after World War II. And we're before World War II right now. So we're going to talk about nationalism a bit. When we get to World War II, nationalism is going to become pretty synonymous with Nazis. And these days, if someone describes themselves as, say, a white nationalist, they're a white supremacist, possibly a neo-Nazi. So, the words change, meanings over time. So militarism. Germany is ready for this war. They think that all of Europe's going to fall into war at some point anyway, so they need a plan. And this is known as the Schlieffen Plan, named after a guy named Schlieffen who comes up with the plan. And the main idea is that Germany knows that France is allies with Russia. And the problem for Germany is France is on one side of them and Russia's on the other. So if they go to war with Germany, they're going to be in a bit of a situation. So they know that that's going to be a problem. And so if Germany sees that this is about to happen, the plan is race through Belgium, not a very well-defended country, get into France, destroy the French army in about a week or two, and then take the entire German army and fling it at Russia. And that's the plan, and it is calculated to the nearest belt buckle. How many belt buckles the troops are going to need, how many boots they're going to... this is planned. It does not go according to plan. There's a famous, I think it's a Mike Tyson quote where he's like, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. So, yeah, that's the Schlieffen Plan. Doesn't work. That's really what you need to know about it. So these are the alliances. You get it yet? Do you see the problem? Russia, France, and England are all allies. Italy, Germany, and Austria-Hungary are all allies. Germany's also separately an ally with the Ottoman Empire, and the Ottoman Empire and Austria-Hungary are separately allied with Serbia. But Germany's not allied with Serbia. And anyway, so what happens when Serbia and Austria-Hungary go to war? Everybody goes to war, which is what happens. That's a problem, this secret alliance thing, because some of these alliances people knew about, some of them they didn't. So they couldn't calculate effectively. We've seen this image before of the British Empire, all the red on the map. England and France are the current winners in the empire building game. Spain and Portugal used to be the big dogs. They've kind of fallen out of favor, especially after the Spanish-American War. So England and France are the two big boys on the scene. So if Germany wants an empire, they need to compete with England and France for their colonies. They might even need to get into a fight with England and France to take over some of their colonies, which would start that whole war we were talking about. And then, of course, there's nationalism. This is the seal of the I think of the Black Hand, which is the group that what's his name? The guy that assassinated Archduke Franz Ferdinand belonged to, Gavrilo Princip. So England, France, Germany, they have their big nations, they have their sense of national pride, but now we have these Slavic people in Southeast Europe. They want to become their own nation, which would mean they're independent from the Austro-Hungarian Empire. All these different ethnic groups want their own country. France has their own country, England has their own country, the Germans have their own country. What about all these different ethnic groups? The Bulgarians, the Slavics, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And in the spot where all those ethnic groups are is the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So that's the main: military, alliances, imperialism, nationalism. That's what sets the stage. So Franz Ferdinand is the heir to the Austro-Hungarian Empire. He's basically like the vice president, if we're talking American politics. And he goes to visit Serbia in 1914. There's some tension between Austro-Hungary and Serbia. There's been some scuffles, some fights, some, tension. And he decides to go to Serbia, give some speeches, shake some hands, kiss some babies, do the politics thing. And while he's there, he gets assassinated by Gavrilo Princip, this 19-year-old member of the Black Hand. You should really look up some stories on how it went down. The day is incredibly wild. There are so many ways, so many opportunities for Franz Ferdinand to get away with his life that day, and just everything goes wrong to end up with him dead. So obviously, if the American vice president went to another country to give some speeches, shake some hands, kiss some babies, do the politics thing, and he gets murdered in that country, he gets assassinated in that country, the U.S. would probably do a pretty similar thing that Austria did here. They demand that Serbia hand over anybody responsible for the death of Franz Ferdinand, and they basically say, if you don't give us the people, we're going to send our police in there to get people. Serbia refuse, they go to war, and we've already talked about what happens when those two countries go to war. The rest of Europe goes to war. And we'll get back to the war. Let's take a peek into this is U.S. history, right? So let's go take a look at U.S. history and their policy of neutrality. So remember, we've talked about these guys before, Washington and Monroe, the isolationists, Washington's farewell speech, the Monroe Doctrine from President Monroe, and they warned us, hey, don't get involved in stuff like this. This is a really bad idea. And kind of behind the text, you can see sort of the French guy, the English bulldog looking dude, the Spain, the guy that represents Spain and all that. And here's America saying no, we're we're handling our business. You guys stay out. America for Americans, which is weird because the Americans during that time had murdered all the Americans who'd originally been there. But yeah. So we have this long history, right? Now, we had started becoming interventionists, right? Teddy Roosevelt, William McKinley, Spanish-American War, like we'd started branching out. But we have this long history of neutrality, of staying out of these European conflicts. And we hadn't really gotten involved in any European conflicts yet. Yeah, we fought with Spain, but it was to free Cuba. That was a very American, our part of the world thing. We were getting involved in Latin America a lot, but again, that's America. We hadn't gotten involved in a European war yet. And President Wilson, he decides to keep to that. 1914, World War I kicks off officially, and the U.S. says, we're staying neutral. Now, Wilson wanted to help England and France. He was very much on the side of England and France. He did not want to help out Germany. There are a lot of other Americans who want to help out Germany. There's a lot of German immigrants. If you've been down in sort of central Texas, a lot of German immigrants down there. The Midwest, full of German immigrants, right? So we have a lot of Americans who believe we should be helping Germany. Wilson and a lot of other Americans believe we should be helping England and France. So Wilson's like, you know what? The only way for this not to become a huge issue in America is if we stay out of it. And Wilson says, I will sell guns, ammunition, food, supplies, etc. The U.S. is allowed to sell this to anybody, either side of the conflict, but they have to come get it from us. We're not sending our people into a war zone. And that seems like a nice neutral thing. Germany brings some ships over, we sell stuff to them. England brings some ships over, we sell stuff to them. The problem is, England has blockaded Germany. Germany cannot get ships out of European waters to get to America. So really, we're only selling to England and France. Really, that's who we're selling to. Now, if a German ship could make it to America, sure, we'd sell to them. But if you're Germany at this part of the war, does the U.S. seem neutral? Do they seem neutral to you? Maybe not. So this is the Lusitania, not the Titanic. Looks very similar, but it's the Lusitania. So Germany takes out a full-page ad in a bunch of American newspapers, especially in New York, warning Americans that if you get on a ship to England, we will be targeting those ships. We believe that they are full of weapons and ammunition and stuff for the war effort, and it is in our national interest to make sure that never gets to England, so we will be targeting these ships as though they are military vessels. So think about, would you get on a boat heading to England if there's full-page ads in the New York Times saying, hey, we're going to sink those boats? So not a lot of people got on those boats, but some people still did. And on May 7th, 1915, a German U-boat, sort of the original submarine. These submarines today are way fancier, but these are sort of the first submarines, sinks the Lusitania, which is a British sort of cruise ship. And there's about 100 or so American passengers, a little bit over 100 American passengers. You know, everyone on board, not everyone on board dies. They've got a few escape boats, but 100, most of the Americans end up dying there on that boat. So about 100 Americans end up dying. And, you know, people freak out like, oh my gosh, Germany targeted a civilian boat that wasn't even a part of the war. But honestly, the Lusitania probably had a lot of ammunition in it, because when the torpedo hit, there was an explosion, but like much bigger explosion than one torpedo could do. So probably had some ammunition on it, probably had a lot of supplies for the war effort on it, disguised as a civilian boat. So Germany considers it a righteous hit. America gets really, really mad. But Wilson's able to keep us out of the war. He's able to kind of calm people down. Kind of like with the Spanish-American War. You know, at the beginning, McKinley kind of keeps people calm until he can't. So Wilson's trying the same thing. He's trying to keep everybody calm, right? 1915, that happens. About a year later-ish, I think about a year later, we're going to hit the date, England intercepts a telegram from Germany to Mexico. And Germany, the guy who sent it, the ambassador, Zimmerman, the German ambassador, Zimmerman, he sends a telegram to Germany that basically says, hey, remember all the land that the U.S. took away from you in the Mexican-American War, 1845, 18-ish? I think 1845 sounds about right. About 20 years before the Civil War. Remember all that land that America took away from you? What if you could have that back? What if we could get you that chunk of California, Arizona, New Mexico, a little bit of Colorado, Texas, that they got from you in that war? Now, Mexico wants nothing to do with this. They do not want to get involved with this crazy war in Europe. They don't want to go to war with America again. But this is it. President Wilson can't be neutral anymore after this. Germany has been caught red-handed trying to provoke a war with the United States. And from the political cartoon there, you can tell sombrero, poncho, obviously Mexico, the dude with the spiked helmet and then the little devil spikes, that's Germany as the devil with a bag of gold in the if you've grown up, if you're currently Christian, or if you grew up Christian, you probably recognize a lot of this imagery of the devil tempting somebody in the desert. That's why it's called The Temptation. This is very much playing on the American audience's Christian sort of background. If you're not Christian, then you probably wouldn't recognize the symbolism right off the top. But little devil horns, Satan in the desert, the little cloven hooves, the goat feet on the German guy. It'd be harder for them to. They didn't give him a pitchfork, I guess. It was the only way they could have made him more Satan in that one. But that's the thing. So tomorrow we'll talk about how the United States goes to war and what we find there, and then the end of the war and the peace treaty and Wilson's successes and failures as a wartime president. So take care.